Welcome to Remembering the Forgotten, a space where leaders think out loud without polish or performance. No scripts, no personas, just what becomes audible when the noise drops and the mind is free to speak for itself. These conversations are not about delivering insight, they are about thinking together in real time, testing ideas against stillness, letting two open minds stretch each other. The intention is simple: to create a space where clarity can emerge and where listeners don't just consume perspectives, but feel permission to engage their own thinking more honestly. Today, I'm joined by Matt Hampton. Matt has spent much of his life moving through fast changing systems, technology, culture, ideas, spaces where complexity is constant and reinvention is normal. But this conversation is about innovation. It's about clarity. We explore what happens when intelligence is no longer used to stay ahead, but to slow down. How discernment sharpens when you stop reacting to every new signal. How authorship begins when you notice where you've been unconsciously optimizing. This exchange is not about tools. It's about awareness inside acceleration. Because when the system steadies, thinking changes. And when thinking changes, the way we move through complexity changes with it. What matters here isn't speed. It's whether you remain intact while everything moves. And with that, Matt, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. So before we begin, when I speak of coherence, I'm pointing to a state where nothing inside is in conflict. Body, thoughts, emotions, and action aligned, moving as one. No push, no urgency, no fear driving the moment. And when I speak of stillness, I don't mean silence. I mean the part of you untouched by expectation or performance. The place that knows before the mind tries to manage it. And that's the ground I'd like us to meet on today.
Fair enough.
So with that, Matt, very specific, where can you just be yourself, untouched by expectation or performance?
Well, I don't know. There's a couple ways I could answer this question, so I'm trying to pick a direction to start us off in. Well, I think that I am obsessed with this concept of metacognition, and the idea of metacognition is tough to get your hands around unless you are absolutely still, right? Because noise, I believe, interrupts that process, right? It gets in the way of really understanding how to think about your thinking, right? And you certainly need to be free of any client, family, friend obligation to sort of have that conversation, because a lot of times it's a little crazy. Right? It's a little bit, you don't necessarily want to share all of those thoughts, right, with the outside world. As they say, it's sometimes more about your inside voice that you want to talk about that with. But without that part of my life in particular, like, I don't know that I could do anything that I do, right? There needs to be this reflection time. I laughed with my kids recently as I will walk around my neighborhood, and I'll talk to myself, like out loud talking to myself. And it's not
Which,
because
by the way, is a sign of high intelligence.
somebody had told me that, although
It is. I believe it is.
yeah, well, I'm a genius because I love doing it, because I feel like it's almost like debate practice, right? Where you
Yeah.
could like talk it out. So I started putting my AirPods in to make people think I'm on a phone call. And it's like funny because you walk by somebody having a full-blown conversation with yourself,
Yeah.
and they see you and they see your AirPods in, they're just like, "Oh, hey, keep on going." They don't even think twice. Meanwhile, I'm like in a full full situation here talking to myself, but it's super helpful. And to me, that's also sort of like a noiseless space because I get to choose the dialogue route that I take, and then I'll take multiple of them to kind of play it out, right? All right, if A, then B, if B, then C, if C, then D,
Mhm.
right? And I find that to be super helpful. And I do that in the shower, I do that on a walk, I do that in the car. I mean, I do it wherever really the mood strikes, but it really I find I used to do it once in a while. Now I'm doing it like several times a day, right? And it's super helpful.
So let's stay there for a moment. I'm a curious, naive person, and I wonder, who does Matt talk to? Tell me about it.
You know, there was a guy years ago named Zat Rana that said reality is redundant. And there was something weirdly complex about that very simple statement. Um, and I've said it for I've quoted him a million times. I have really like absorbed that comment deeply. And the reason it stood out to me, I think, was because if you look broadly, most people, most of the time, will reply a certain way.
Mhm.
One of my biggest pet peeves is when you're getting into an argument with somebody, or not even an argument, a spirited debate with somebody. I'm sure you've had this experience. You always, or no, that never
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
drives me crazy. It's like one of my
It's
biggest pet
classic.
peeves. It's very,
Mhm.
and it's so predictable, right? It's like,
Mhm.
okay,
It is, yeah.
I said, first of all, you don't always or never do anything. That's the only
Mhm.
always there is, right?
Mhm.
And that's the only never. It's never, never, and it's never always, right? Like
Mhm.
those are the only certainties.
Mhm.
Bringing that up, in my view, has only two potential reasons why you would say that. One is you're just lazy. You just don't care enough about this conversation to put any thought into it whatsoever.
Mhm.
And so you're just going to spout out the easy, dumb thing, right? By the way, the cousin of that is replying back based on memes that you saw on the internet, right? Like these are also lazy. These are sort of telltale signs of the lazy.
Mhm.
Um, or you actually believe some of these things, and that signals to me unexamined framework of how you're processing the world, right? And these are kind of the same thing, but they are a little different, right? Like one of them, lazy could be time based. Like maybe I'm just lazy right now. Maybe
Mhm.
normally I'm perfectly engaged, but today I just don't
Mhm.
care. But like unexamined assumptions and having a conversation from an unexamined viewpoint is unfortunately very common, right?
Mhm.
People read half a headline and report it as truth, right?
Mhm.
They hear something and they don't think to themselves, does this actually make sense? Like,
Mhm.
is this really plausible? Like, and sometimes, and I'm sure you've also seen this, sometimes the difference between that opinion or position and the truth is not separated by more than a Google search. Like, I mean, some of these
Mhm.
things aren't even hard to get information on.
Mhm.
And I'm not
So I
talking about,
invite you to stay here for a moment.
yeah, yeah.
What if there is a third alternative?
A third alternative is the
Mhm.
one I
Let me
tried.
probe. Let me
Oh,
probe something.
probe it.
I'm curious. Are people in a relaxed state when they use generalizations? Rarely. They're usually agitated. They're annoyed. Because I rarely would say, you know what, Matt, you always leave the coffee on the
Right,
table.
right.
No, I would not, right? So, what if our language and what we're saying are actually mirrors of what's going on inside of us? It's not
You,
choice, it's a mirror.
that's an interesting separation because I think on one side, yeah, you're right. That's probably more true than I might have given credit for a minute ago, right? So in other words, I think if you say, all, and I love third rail type topics because it really kind of like solidifies it. Like if you say
Mhm.
all Republicans are conservative and all
Mhm.
Democrats are liberals, right? You don't necessarily have to be agitated to say that, right? Like you could
Mhm.
be totally calm having a beer with your friends,
Mhm.
right? Like
Mhm.
that could be. That is what I was talking about, I think, right?
Mhm.
That's more of the unexamined framework, right? Like the I'm not really thinking about
Okay.
this too deep. Like I'm just gonna just say, and the
And
laziness part
I
kicks in,
second that. I
right?
second that. Yeah.
Now, if we were having a conversation after the State of the Union address where, you are Hispanic and your cousin got deported by the administratives, this administration's uh, immigration policies, now maybe you're agitated as all get up, and this is coming from a place of absolute
Mhm.
impatience.
Mhm.
Different, I think different things, but even both of those, what they have in common is that if you were to consider how you were thinking about
Mhm.
the problem is almost always different than what you're reporting at that moment from that position at that time.
Mhm. Mhm.
And problems, I was at an event years ago with Richard Saul Wurman, who created TED, right? And fascinating guy. But one thing that stuck with me with what he said was TED was started because the world isn't either or, it's and,
Mhm.
right? And that kind of stuck with me too, because, you could be a Democrat and a Republican.
Mhm.
You can go left and right in some cases,
Mhm.
right? Like there's a
Mhm.
lot of things,
Mhm.
right? That can that aren't just a black and white answer. And I think the difference between knowledge and wisdom is in the ability to sort of dissect those nuances and know the difference of shade in between these things. Like that is I think where we should sort of aspire to get to.
Mhm.
What do they say? Like a smart person solves a problem, a wise person makes the problem, avoids the problem altogether, right?
Mhm.
And why is that, right? Like it's because they thought about it. Like they've thought about it not just at a superficial, I read half the clickbait headline and moved on. No, they pulled this thing apart and atomized it in their hands and in their head and like really absorbed it at a molecular level and said, all right, I've got my head around this. Now I can talk about it. Right. And, I do technology and technology lives in that world, right? User experience design isn't about how does your homepage look to you.
Mhm.
It's how does your homepage look to every type of person that exists? And how do
Mhm.
you make it comfortable for all of those people?
Mhm.
And there's some pieces of that are science based, right? Like, people read like this, they're colorblind, people do this thing differently, braille people do this thing differently. Like there's some science there, but it's also like real cognitive based, right? Like you have to really think about that problem to solve it. You can't just take a guess. There's no chat GPT that's going to talk you through that answer. You got to really like almost live that experience to understand it enough to really do it.
Mhm.
I was a martial artist.
Otherwise, it becomes a garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yeah, and I was a martial art guy. I have been for 25 years or so, and
Mhm.
I didn't get good at martial arts until I started teaching it, right?
Mhm.
And why
Mhm.
is that? Because when you have to slow something down to the point of
Mhm.
just so slow that it almost hurts, even though you did it like that when you learned, it was all new to you. So you were just sort of like struggling just to keep your head above water, right? Or in this case, keep a fist from hitting you in the face, right? But when you have to years later teach that same move to somebody else at that speed, now all of a sudden you see all these things that are different that you never saw before. And you understand that problem at a completely different level than you ever could have if you hadn't slowed it way, 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 way down. Um, I can't remember the movie and it's driving me crazy right now, but there's an art piece where they took a movie and it was like an hour long or 45-minute long piece that in the movie was only something like 3 seconds. But they slowed it down and made it
Really?
super
That's interesting.
exaggeratingly long.
Okay, that's
And the
interesting.
person who wrote the article said, I'd seen this movie a million times, but I never
Uh-huh.
realized all the nuance that was inside of their performance. This
Mhm.
person felt jealousy, this person felt rage. And now all of a sudden, whether it was true or not, you're thinking about this in a completely different way. And why is that? Because you slowed it down to almost stop and looked at it one in moment at a time.
Is it similar when you have your self talks?
Say that again.
Is it similar when you have your self talks?
Yeah, for sure. It's in fact probably the apex of that is when I have my self talks
Mhm.
because I can now stop myself in the middle of a sentence and say, wait a minute, hold on a second. What are the things that somebody's likely to say to me right now if we were in a conversation,
Mhm.
right? What are they going to tell me I missed or what are they going to say? What about this or what about that, right?
Mhm.
And the what if, what about this, what about that? You know what those generally are
Mhm.
is a reflection of an unexamined framework, right? Like you are
Mhm.
not examining
Mhm.
anything that you're thinking about. You're just repeating back something somebody else said.
Mhm. Mhm.
And again, I don't know. I'm like I said, I'm not blaming anybody for this, that part. I'm not blaming people for
Mhm.
their reaction because that's predictable.
Mhm. So let me add something to that. It's a question. What is it you are talking with when you have your self talks? That's the first question. The second part, Matt, is it of the same intelligence as you are when you ask the question? Or do you sense you're talking with an intelligence in you that is beyond the one who asks the question?
Interesting. Well, I think for me, it's varied. It varies because what I'm doing is I'm trying to figure out, answering your second question first, I'm trying to figure out what a variety of intelligences might bring to this conversation. Here's what a complete doom scrolling TikTok Luddite would say, and here's what a Nobel laureate might say, right? And maybe not that extreme, but for this conversation, you get what I'm
Mhm.
saying, right?
Mhm.
I'm trying to like pull this apart in a bunch of different ways because to answer your first question, I'm practicing, I'm doing reps at the gym of clear thinking myself.
Mhm.
I'm learning and relearning how to not just jump down a rabbit hole because somebody else told me to come in,
Mhm.
right? Like
Mhm.
I'm trying to say, wait a minute, I don't want to react like this. Having a conversation
Mhm.
from a point of reaction isn't a conversation, it's a reaction. Those are different. Like,
Mhm.
you know, we have two different words for that in the English language for good reasons. They're different. They're not,
Mhm.
and while a conversation could be a reaction is not a conversation, right? Like, and
Mhm.
so, but that takes practice. No one's born with that skill, you know? I mean, if you look at it from an anthropological standpoint, if you're different than me and you pose a threat, I'm going to kill you. Like, that's it. Like, this is how we
Mhm.
survive, right? This is built into our DNA. That's a reaction. You're weird. You're freaking me out. Stab you in the face. Like, right? Like, this is very clear. This is how we all got
You
here.
think
You and
that's how we're born?
I think that's how we survived up till now. And if you look at 2 million years of evolution, you and I are only having this conversation because our ancestors were the strongest people in that line.
Mhm.
That's it.
But shouldn't we, you and I, be more evolved than
Oh no, we
that?
for sure should. No, 100%. I'm not,
And
I'm
why aren't
absolutely,
we?
I'm not at
Matt,
all saying
why
we should stick with
why
that land,
isn't society more evolved than it is?
but that's my
Because it's
point.
it's still in fight and flight and freeze
I know, but that's the
and
explanation
survival.
for this behavior. It is at its core, I think, survival, right? Like if
But
for
why
me,
do you think that is? Because isn't it? isn't it basically stupid to stick to a survival mode when there is not much to survive? When there is
Well,
actually so much potential to thrive instead? But something must be behind that thinking that keeps it intact in society through school, through college, through business, through wherever it is.
well, there's a couple things about that, right? One is, is it stupid to breathe every couple seconds? No,
No, but that
right?
is a normal thing. And I
Well,
think
so
survival
is
is
fight or
not.
flight. Well, survival is absolutely a normal thing. I mean, you know what I mean? Like
But if there is no threat, why would you fight it?
we don't respond to threats because we recognize them necessarily as threats, I don't think. I think we respond to threats because we have a reptilian piece of our body that says, get the hell out of here. Like this is a problem, right? Like there's a piece of us that's involuntary that you see a saber-toothed tiger running at you, you're going to turn around and book it the other direction. Or you're going to grab the biggest
That's the funny aspect. And I
but
dare to be
you're gonna grab the
devil's
biggest,
advocate.
sharpest stick that you can grab and try to like stand your
Matt,
ground, right? Like those are the
I dare to be the devil's advocate at the
no, I no,
moment.
listen, it's fair, but here's the problem, right? It's not it's fair from a rational conversation standpoint.
Mhm,
It's not fair from an evolutionary standpoint because if you think about how long ago was it that this luxury that you're talking about became an option? 200 years, maybe tops,
mhm. Okay.
tops.
Mhm,
And then when you look at the rate of change inside of that window, it, it's unfair to ask a biological entity that's lived for millions of years one way to inside of 200 years change.
what do you
It's
think about neuroplasticity?
neuroplasticity is a fun topic because that's the only
Is it
reason
fun?
I love it. Yeah, I think neuroplasticity is awesome because if I know they've disproven it, but one of the most intoxicating topics, like thought processes I've seen in my adult life is this idea, the stoned ape theory, right? And I know it's been disproved, but the idea was we found a pile of mushrooms and we started eating them like crazy and our brains grew differently. Now, I think that that's exciting for a couple reasons, right? One is, let's just say, how do you explain the evolution from I'm going to bang two rocks together to make a fire to I created a space shuttle that's going to Mars, right? And it's really interesting when you think about this, but like everything that's on Earth right now that was required to make a cell phone and the internet was on the Earth when the dinosaurs were here. Nothing's changed. We didn't get a
Mhm,
meteor with a bunch of shit we didn't have. No, it's all been here.
mhm, mhm.
The
Agree.
only thing difference was is we figured out how to manipulate it, and once we figured out how to manipulate
Mhm,
it, we can do this, and then we can do that, and it keeps it
mhm,
on going and going.
mhm,
But like, what made that happen? That didn't happen overnight, right? 2 million
mhm,
years ago, those human-like people, they weren't doing much of anything like we're doing now, right?
mhm,
And so something had to have changed. Neuroplasticity is an explanation of what can change that. Now we have different views of it.
mhm,
We don't need to go down too far down any of these rabbit holes, but like psychedelics, one of the most intriguing pieces about that is it literally creates new neurons. Like you are
mhm,
now not literally, you are not the same brain you were before that. And if
mhm,
you keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it, that neuroplasticity changes over time, right? And
mhm,
that makes you different, makes you pliable,
mhm,
makes you malleable.
mhm, mhm,
And I think that when you look at my kids used to say fixed mindset versus growth mindset, right?
mhm,
And I love that when I was that they were teaching that to my kids in like kindergarten. But you
mhm,
know, the problem is our current world, and to a lesser slash larger degree, the industrial revolution onwards, has really encouraged a fixed mindset because that's what makes money. That's what makes companies. That's what makes
Let's stop here for a sec.
sure.
I like what you just said. So basically, our environment shapes us into who we are today, correct?
Yeah, it's a contributing factor, huge.
So your kids started out differently. You did not have a chance to observe yourself when you were a child, but you were able to observe your kids, right?
Sure.
And you have a couple, so you
Yeah.
can compare.
Yeah. Correct.
Did they start with that mindset when they were born?
Yeah, I think all kids do. And caveat here, I have two art degrees. Like I'm an entrepreneur, for years and years. And so like my kids I'm a woodworker, I'm a photographer, I have telescopes, I have this. I mean, I'm a guy who has it's like a Disneyland for kids, right? They got
Mhm,
everything under the sun here, right? So,
mhm,
but there's all these studies that are like, hey, most kids are geniuses if you test them on that scale, and
mhm,
except for when they get to like 8 or 9,
mhm,
falls off a cliff. And
mhm.
why is that?
Why?
Because
Mhm,
yeah, it falls off a cliff because now all of a sudden dum-dums like you and I are teaching them a
mhm,
bunch of shit that they shouldn't necessarily be learning.
mhm,
And they
mhm,
start to fix that. It calcifies, it doesn't
mhm,
go anywhere. And then we systemically enforce that throughout middle school, high school, university. It keeps going and going.
mhm,
And now you get into the workforce and you're just supposed to be a cog in a machine.
mhm,
And, people like me are the weirdos. Like, what do you mean you draw
mhm,
things and you paint things? What the hell's wrong with you? Like, you're supposed to be in spreadsheet land in a cubicle somewhere and like just
mhm,
rubber stamp, right?
mhm,
So, yeah, I think my kids were like that, but I think they hardened their minds just the same because at the end of the day, I didn't homeschool them. I didn't teach them. They're a product of the same
mhm,
world I am. And they just keep solidifying. But one day, I'll tell you one example that made me really, really appreciate how plastic their minds, malleable their minds were. My son might have been 3 or 4. He was young. And I was cleaning up after dinner
mhm,
and he grabbed the towel out of my hands and he said, "Can I clean?" And I was like, "Sure, come on, give it a shot." He starts cleaning and he doesn't, he's not really cleaning. He's just mirroring me.
mhm, mhm.
But he gets to the other dish towel hanging. We have two of them in our kitchen usually, one over the stove and one of them over another hook over by the sink. And he gets to the one over the stove and he cleans the other towel with the other towel. And it,
Interesting.
it never would have occurred to me like to do that. But he's not thinking
Mhm,
about the logic of the situation.
mhm,
He's not thinking about like, I'm cleaning and this thing is also cleaning and it's porous. It's not a hard surface like what we're also cleaning. He's not thinking about any of this stuff. He's not encumbered by this ridiculous line of thought. He just
mhm,
goes, no, I got
mhm,
to clean the kitchen and this is how you do it.
mhm, mhm,
And it got me really then I thought about art school. And I said, you know what's fun about art school? And I think everybody should go to art school, by the way. You, me, your mother, your grandmother, everybody everyone for a little time, year, 6 months. Why? Art school doesn't care if you know how to paint, draw, sculpt. They assume that if you're there, you've got that under control, right? And you'll get better at it by doing it a lot while you're there. But you know what they do care a lot about? Critical creative thinking. And that's all they care about, really. And I've taught at big art schools, some of the biggest in the East Coast. I've gone to art school. I have 2 art degrees. Like I've lived this. I have most of my friends are artists. I mean, I love it. I love that world. And you know what they all have in common? Critical creative thinking. It's all they
mhm.
do. You know, I just had this conversation with somebody on a podcast the other day. The banana duct tape to a wall. That wasn't about bananas or duct tape or the wall. But asking that question, even like recognizing that a banana taped to the wall has a handful of variables. You ask most people, "Hey, talk to me about this painting." They're like, or this piece. It's a banana taped to a wall. Well, tell me what about it? I mean, I don't know. It's a banana and there's some duct tape. But you know what they don't do? They don't do what artists do. They don't say, well, what kind of wall was it? Why that wall? Why not a different wall? What does the color of the wall matter? Does the material of the wall matter? What about the room that this wall is in? Is there a roof on it? Is it inside? Is it outside? Like, what are all these things that mean something but might not signal something necessarily quickly, but add to that subconscious perception that we all have of this thing? And that's what we were just talking about a little while ago, but that's that ability to dissect between the raindrops, as it were, right? Like
Mhm.
you're not looking at one thing, you're looking at this sort of hard to define some of things and pulling apart what are the shades of also in this situation. The wall is tall. It is also red. It is also, the
I
banana is
agree.
also yellow versus green. Banana could be brown too. It could be rotting. Like,
Mhm.
why choose that banana? Right? Like, what about duct tape? Duct tape comes in every color and pattern known to man. Why use
Mhm.
silver duct tape? We all know what duct tape looks like. If it was camouflage, you'd still know it was duct tape. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, and that's the thing that fascinates me about stillness, about questioning, about metacognition, about all these things, is that when you think about them, you realize how much there is to think about.
You know what's interesting, and that's something that sticks with me for a while now. Cognition is thinking. Is stillness really thinking?
For
Or is
me,
it
for
an
sure.
entirely different area?
For me, it's the only place that thinking can happen because in my day to day, you're, for better or for worse, you're problem solving, which is thinking, but it's thinking from experience versus possibility, right? Like, at least loosely speaking, I should say, broadly speaking, that's how I see the difference, right? If I'm on a talk with myself around the neighborhood, I'm thinking about what could be possible. I'm role playing. I'm saying, okay, well, what if they say this? What if they say that? What if they say this? What if they say this? And oh, by the way, I just realized that one of the pillars of my assumptions about this might be porous. Maybe, maybe I didn't have this right. And I catch myself in this all the time. I'm like, oh shit, you know what?
So
I
if I
should,
get you right, correct me, please.
sure.
You are having a conversation with yourself on a cognitive basis. Basically, one part that is not that biased because it's not objective or objectified by the situation or the environment. But in the end, it's almost conversation with the better you, one that is less distorted, but it's still you. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's always going to be me, obviously, but I, I'm working through things that I think I know about the situation and trying to figure out if that's enough to be informed on it, right? Like, because you can never know everything about the topic, right? Like, it's not like you're going to ever find, there's no end, right? Somebody said, you don't go to the gym to lift weights until a destination. You've never lifted all the weights, right? It's just,
Right. Yeah.
like, so, but there is sort of like a don't, don't lose the good in quest for the perfect kind of moment here where you're like, okay, look, I know I have to have a conversation about this. I know I have to present this. I know I have to talk about this. I know, whatever. The genius of things or the wisdom of things comes out of knowing, I think, all of the moving parts that you can and being able to maneuver effortlessly through that rather than coming to almost defend a position, right? Like if you cut, it's one thing, if you want to defend a position, that's fine, but your opinion's not the only one out there. And if you want to have a real conversation with somebody, you need to kind of figure out what colors their decision. Like what made you
Mhm.
think like this? And like that
Mhm.
comes from questioning, right? Well, you can't question somebody if you're in a defensive posture
Mhm.
about the thing, right? Because you're
I
not
agree.
open-minded. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
and so, but that takes, for me anyway, and maybe there's people that don't have this problem, but I need practice on that. Like I need to be
Mhm.
able to like workshop that and say, okay, this is somebody who's coming at it from this angle and this
Mhm.
angle, and this
So
angle.
basically, you workshop and prep almost then the actual conversation with the other person, huh?
Yeah, it becomes easy. I've done a
Mhm.
lot of
Mhm.
Ironman, triathlons, right? And like everyone's
Mhm.
like, "Oh my
Mhm.
God, that's exhausting." I'm like, actually, the day of the Ironman's pretty simple. Like
Mhm.
it's not exhausting at all. I mean, it's a long
It's just
day,
run.
but you just put one foot in front of the other until you're done,
Mhm.
right? Like you just keep
Mhm.
going. But the only reason you could do that is because you've trained for it for like a year,
Mhm.
right? Like
Mhm.
this isn't new stuff to you. This isn't like,
Mhm.
you're not inventing anything new on race
Mhm.
day. You
But now I begin to understand you a little bit better. And that's only because my questioning. Because for you, everything happens basically cognitively in your mind, thinking, correct?
A lot, yeah, yes.
Is there another part?
So I'm a hyper physical person.
Hmm.
So I definitely, like I said, I do woodworking, I do sculpture, I do like
Hmm.
photography, which is, you have you're interacting with a machine still, right?
Hmm.
I am physical. I like martial arts. I like Ironman. I like marathons. I
Hmm.
like, hiking. I like snow skiing, right? Like I like physical things, but most of those, and that at the time of this interview, it's the winter time in the Northeast in the United States,
Hmm.
and I do a lot of skiing. Do you know how cognitive skiing is? There's a lot going on. It's like a golf swing, every golf swing is
Hmm.
37 movements put together into a quarter of a second, right? Skiing's very similar. So you can ski down a mountain. Gravity's going to take care of getting you to the bottom, right? Like
Hmm.
at a simplest form, you can just aim your skis to the bottom and you don't have to look pretty. You don't have to be pretty. You don't have to be fast. You don't have to be slow, but gravity will take care of this. You'll get eventually
Hmm.
to the bottom. Now, it might be feet overhead going down the
Right.
mountain, or it could be a perfect, beautiful S curve going down and you
Hmm.
look like an Olympian. I mean, there's a variety of ways. But if you
Hmm.
want to do that beautiful S thing, that doesn't just happen. You need to practice it. But moreover, you have to know what you're practicing. Like you have to actually understand the physics of skiing. And that involves manipulation of gravity. It involves manipulation of force. Not a physicist. I'm not an engineer. I don't know these things intrinsically or intuitively rather. I had to have somebody show me, okay, well, how does this movement affect ski pressure? Well, how is ski pressure important? Why is it important? What do I miss out on if I don't do that? Not to say that I ever wanted to be in the Olympics, but I did want to understand what I was doing. So I've spent a
Hmm.
lot of time thinking about skiing,
Hmm.
not actually skiing. But when I do ski, and I'd like to think I'm a fairly competent skier, I ski competently because I've thought about it way more than I've ever done it.
That's an interesting aspect. You mentioned something even more interesting for me, intuition.
Hmm.
What part does that play in your life?
I don't know if you and I have enough time to talk about
That's what I saw
intuition.
coming.
I-
We will have a
Intuition, because
second
here's the
session.
thing. I, I don't know personally that there's a huge difference between intuition and a lot of knowledge. Because to me, intuition is my internal LLM, right? It's like, people are like mystified by how LLMs work. I said, look, it's a giant spreadsheet that grabs information really, really fast, right? That to me is another way of describing intuition. It's this huge, like internal spreadsheet based on every word I've ever heard, every feeling I've ever felt, every ski slope I ever fell down, synthesized into what LLMs also do, which are next token predictors. What comes next? That's
So
what an
you don't
LLM does.
think there is more than what we just described?
That's why I said, how much time do you got? Because like
We will
this is
meet
one of
again.
those things. Yeah. This is one of those things where you're like intuition. Look, I have a podcast where we talk about like a bunch of weird health stuff, right? We had one woman on who literally talked us into an Akashic record meditation.
Mhm.
Beautiful show, great experience. And if you take her at face value, we literally went into the Akash, like just from our
Mhm.
seats, and we were tapping the divine,
Mhm.
little nudge into the cosmos, right?
Mhm.
Now, look, I don't disagree with her. In fact, I think there's a lot of feeling inside of me that feels like Neo from the Matrix. It says, I knew it. I just knew it, right? Like there's this feeling that that is a true thing. And that, since I've never been to the Akash, like I can't say that I have ever been there.
Mhm. No,
I
I
can't,
see that. Hmm.
right? I can't say that that's based on intuition, but here's the thing. If I'm walking down the street and I feel something behind me, that I think might be described as an amalgam of lived experience. I lived in New York City. I lived, like I lived in places where hyper attention is a survival mechanism as much as it is a
Hmm.
convenience. And
Hmm.
you just learn to do those things. When I'm in a business meeting talking to somebody about an iPhone app, I've built a gabillion iPhone apps. Like I'm not, so like when people say, "Oh, what's your intuition tell you?" That's a very normal call back to our earlier, possibly lazy comment, right? This isn't an examined question. It's a unexamined sort of question because they don't know how to ask it better. But they say, "Hey, what's your intuition tell you?" I could say, "Well, my intuition doesn't tell me shit." 30 years of
Hmm.
doing this tells me this, though, if that's what you're really asking me.
Hmm.
But what's the difference between those two things, right? Like at a
So
certain point, they
it's
become like,
basically like AI, right?
yeah.
It's all pattern recognition in the end.
And I don't want to reduce everything to that, but like it feels like that could be true. Like it feels like that could be very true, right? Like because I'll tell you what, my intuition at 50, having lived in a major metropolitan cities, two or three of them, having two kids, doing this, doing that, doing the other, my intuition's very, very different than my children's. It's very different than my 84-year-old neighbor who grew up without electricity in another country. Like not good or not better or worse, but just very, very, very different,
Different.
And so how do you explain that, right? Like how do you explain the thing that we're calling the same thing with three different people, right? You and I are in different countries. Your intuition's got to be different than mine, right? Again, not better, not worse, but just super different. There's things that you might call intuition that I'd look at and be like, holy shit, that's amazing.
Common sense, or yeah.
Like, and then there's other things where
Yeah.
you say, and I'm like, man, my common sense tells me that this is very wrong. Like, and I'm not going to
Hmm.
buy into that at all. They're
Hmm.
both intuition, but like again, that's why I said I think intuition, if you look at it one way, could be your own internal LLM. It's a next token
It's
predictor.
worth thinking about it.
Yeah. And that's why I said
So,
it's a complicated thing. I did a lot of research on human bias and
mhm.
the origins of inspiration and stuff. And the brain is such a fascinating place. And when you look at neuroplasticity and psychedelics and stuff, you start to say, okay, well, if I'm literally creating a new neuron and then I got a new idea, like, did that idea come from the psychedelics? Did it come from my intuition? Where did it come from? And you don't know. You just,
It is interesting. It's food for thought.
it is. Yeah.
That's why I look forward to connect you with my friend Stefan.
I love it.
It will be
Yeah.
a
I mean,
fascinating conversation. So I want to be mindful of your time.
sure.
And I have one final question for you.
Lay it on me.
If someone feels overwhelmed right now, what would you want them to return to?
You know, I think I've always thought this, but I think in particular with reflection on this conversation, I think returning to intuition and checking to make sure that intuition is on stable ground is really what I think the only thing we should return to, right? Because at the end of the day, for the thing you have to do next, your intuition isn't going to help me, right? Your intuition might be great for you and maybe a bunch of people else, but maybe not me. So ultimately, you might be able to collect ideas from other people and whatnot, but like you need to be able to return to yourself and check yourself out in order to make any progress if you're in that overwhelmed state. And I think that that's a skill that most people were never really taught to do. And so because of that, they don't do it at all. I mean, I could list a dozen people that I know personally that I love, friends, family, people close to me that have never done that a day in their life. Like, right? Like it's not, they're not bad people. They just, no one taught them how to do this. And I think in a world where we're at, where the difference between the new currency, I think, is thinking, right? The new currency is how clear of a thinker you are. And if you weren't ever taught to think for yourself, and in most cases, the opposite is true, you were deliberately taught to not think for yourself,
Uh-huh.
puts everyone at a disadvantage unless you're paying attention and you do the work. Listen, if you want huge biceps, you got to go to the gym. Like, like you just,
That's where
there's
the
no two
critical
ways about it.
thinking comes into it again, huh?
Well, that's what I'm saying. If you want to be a clear thinker, you have to practice clear thinking. You know,
Yeah.
it's just like anything else. You want to play the guitar, you don't pick up a banjo. Like,
Yeah.
like you go grab a guitar, and that's what I think we need to sort of focus on. And honestly, the thing to bring us back to your original question is this moment of stillness that people I think need to return to. I mean, at 45-ish, maybe a little earlier, maybe 45, 4, 43. I started a daily meditation practice. I'd meditated on and off for years.
Mhm.
I can't function in a day anymore properly without that. Like there's plenty of days where I'll just miss it because I'm busy. I got an early call, whatever, but I'm off that whole day.
Interesting.
Like, and it's not the kind of off that you can come back to. It's like, oh
Mhm.
no, I'm off.
Uh-huh.
It's like you ever had a hangover. You're not. It's not like you're hungover in the morning and you're fine by dinner. You're
Uh-huh.
more hungover in the morning than you are at dinner, but you're still hungover that
Mhm.
whole day. You got to kind of wait
Mhm.
to go to bed and wake up and reset
Makes
the next.
sense.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like that's kind of the only way to get out of that. And I feel like for me, that's where I'm at. Like without that silence, without that sort
Mhm.
of introspection, like I can't, I'm not nearly operational like I am
Mhm.
when I have it.
Fascinating. Matt, thank you so much for this conversation.
This was wonderful. I love a good brain conversation where you got to force me to think about stuff.
This was Remembering the Forgotten, a conversation held in clarity in our performance. If something in this exchange shifted how you see, let it stay with you. A few quiet pointers are waiting below.